Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Hello everybody and welcome back, and thank you for joining me. You're listening to the Crypto Realm on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm Deborah Hatswell, and this week I'm going to bring to you a series of journal entries that have taken place over the last 14-15 months or so, and they are based in the very north of Scotland in a beautiful area. There's a very small cottage and it's surrounded by farms and shooting estates, really. There isn't very much up there, in all honesty. There are a number of lochs and a number of rivers, and it's an ideal place. So I hope you enjoy them as we go through. As you will see, that as they are journal entries, some of them are me taping them in the field and some of them are at home. So there is a little bit of background noise, but nothing that would, put you off. So I hope you enjoy this. And this is just half of the journals. I will be bringing you the update to them. So here we go. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining me. Somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, 2017. I wanted to chat with you, Deborah, as I have a series of events here that have happened in an area I like to walk the dog and around my home that I've not been able to discuss with anyone else to gather their thoughts or opinions on what's taken place. And it's not something you can easily share, and there are no protocols in what to do in this situation. I know, because I've searched high and wide in the hopes of some answers. First, I should say, I moved to the area several years ago now to connect with nature. It's how I relax, and I love to walk the woods with my dog and to write, as it's peaceful and quiet here. We walk the farm lanes, and I don't have many neighbours to speak of. I've lived here for over 3 years, and I've raised my dog from a pup. I planted an orchard garden, and I've spent a lot of time talking to myself and writing, just taking in all the space and sky, as it's a joy on its own. The day the first experience happened was an ordinary day, no different to any other, and little did I know my life was about to change in a way most people could never imagine. I realise now that sometimes life brings you something that changes you, and suddenly cogs fit into place and you see things in a whole new way. Well, anyway, as they say in the UK, let's get back to that day. My dog and I were in the back garden, and I was trying for the millionth time to teach him to fetch, and he wouldn't do it. He was acting really comical, so I was laughing and he was barking, and we were both enthralled in our game. And then I had this feeling we were being watched. I felt it so strongly. I turned and looked over the field and behind the cottage, and there he was. He was standing under a tree, in a small clump of trees, a huge figure, broad in width and very large. He was all dark in colour, and he was dark brown. Besides the standard trees is a small building, a kind of empty storage shed, and he was next to this building just watching me. I couldn't really work out what I was seeing. It just did not make any sense at all. I know Scotland has no bears, and I thought it might be a huge stump, but I knew that there wasn't one there. So I'm just standing there looking at him in awe, and he's looking back at me. And he starts to move from foot to foot, shifting from one leg to the other, in a sort of slow motion movement. I wasn't terrified or anything like that, just a bit scared, and even more fascinated. And without thinking about it or realising why, I started to do the same thing, copying his motion as we mirrored each other, swaying a bit side to side, and then we both stopped and just stood there. I really still couldn't see any features on this creature or decide what he was. It was in the shadow of the tree branch that he was standing under, and I thought he must be enormous. When we both stopped swaying, I sort of bent over a bit, like a kind of bow, as a sort of greeting. I don't know what inspired me to do that. It happened without any thought on my part. And then we both just stood there again, looking at each other. I thought he'd just stay there as he seemed settled in that spot. So I ran back into the house and grabbed my binoculars, and out again I went, and he was gone. Seconds, but when I returned he'd disappeared. That was surprising to me, because to be out of sight in the area he would have had to move really quickly. And I couldn't understand all of this, and I couldn't put it to the back of my mind. So I started walking around and seeing if I could see anything and listening to what the locals had to say. But I hesitated to tell anybody I'd seen a gorilla or some wild man, so I said nothing. And I tried looking it up online. Now, there's lots about the North American Bigfoot, but nothing really other than hints about the UK Bigfoot. So I was left with that for a while, and then something strange happened again. It was summer, and I'd had to work late into the night on my book, and little pebbles started to hit the window. Chink, 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 one after another. When I stepped outside to see what was throwing them, there was nothing there. There was nothing that I could see, but I could hear these owls. What sounded like owls, they were whipping around in a huge semicircle above me, from the wood next to the cottage, over the fields to another woodland, and then back again in succession. And it was a mile or more that this was travelling, and it seemed like the birds were signalling or something. But over time I realised the owl sound wasn't really authentic, and it was kind of weird to have 6 owls at once. Over the farm lane that runs beside the cottage, there's a huge hedge of beech and rhododendrons. This was relatively impervious when I moved here, but in recent months a few gaps have developed. A child who visits here first noticed them. She wanted to hide in them, so I had a look to make sure it would be safe, and I found them filled with sticks and a few logs, and it dawned on me that seated on the log inside one of them, it would be possible to peer through the thick leaves and see me sitting at the table working. The rubbish bins at the back have been rummaged through a few times, and chicken bones and a few oddments have been taken. And one morning I went out to clean up as usual, and there was a huge dead male rabbit laid out in front of the bin, and it was gigantic. He wasn't shot, and I could tell as his neck was broken. I didn't make any connection immediately, and thought it was a weird prank or coincidence, and I threw the rabbit into the newly ploughed field. This spring, when the flowers began blooming in the borders around the cottage, I noticed 2 big boot prints behind the cottage. That was my theory, for 2 very long indentations anyway. They were about 20 inches long and didn't show any definition. I thought I might have a prowler, so I decided to put up a curtain and shield the window from prying eyes. I also showed the indentations to my daughter, who agreed it looked like someone had been there and was able to step up and into the flower bed in one go, which meant they had an enormous stride. About a month ago, I was leaving to go into town in my car, and you have to travel down a long winding lane, and it's bordered on either side by these rhododendron thickets. And as I came around a corner, a large limb through the air and landed in the road, and it really shook me up a bit, because it was, if I'd have been going faster and it had come through the window, I don't know what would have happened. It came from my direction where there's a steep drop-off, and whoever could launch it had been pretty powerful, and it was obvious if I wanted to go forward I'd have to get out and move it, which felt like an ambush, I'll be honest, as I was still thinking I had prowls on the property. But I finally decided to give it a go, and it took a bit to drag the branch onto the verge, and I was just huffing and puffing with this thing. The farmer came along behind me on a 4-wheeler and helped me to move it out of the lane. Other strange things happen here all the time. I find stones and little wilted bunches of flowers on the steps out back. When I'm out walking, I can feel he's around somewhere watching. I don't feel scared. Somehow I can tell his loneliness, although I don't think he is alone here at all. He seems he isn't the only one that calls the forest here home. and I like to think he has a family and loved ones and kin of his own. I think on one or two occasions he's even tried to offer the hand of friendship. Earlier in the year I was in the front garden and I wanted to remove a big but scraggly hydrangea bush there. It was old and deteriorated and it had a couple of large branches to it, and it was not at all attractive, right in the middle of the lawn. It was far too much work for me, and I struggled most of the afternoon with it and finally admitted defeat. The next morning, the hydrangea had been more or less demolished. It was bent over and all the branches were splintered down to the ground, and it was snapped into manageable pieces that I could carry off myself. I think he's also brought toys for my dog. Cherry whips that are twisted into shape, and he throws them into the back garden where I let the dog out to play. I didn't believe anything about Bigfoot before this. I'd heard of them, but never really paid much attention. And although I'm uncertain who or what he is, he certainly fits that description. When I saw him standing on the hill, he was far enough away that I couldn't see his features clearly. He was stood where he needed to be in the shadows, so I couldn't see his face or expression, but he could see me perfectly. If I had to describe him, in short, I would say he was like a gentle giant, just standing there on the hill, watching me in amusement.
Part 2 of the journal. These journals happened in 2017.
Hello Deborah, this is Isabella from the far north. Somewhere in Scotland where, if you recall, it appears a family of Bigfoot have become habituated to a locality near my home. For more than a year I've observed what I can of their presence after the alpha male of this clan appeared on the hill above my cottage, making himself known for reasons I'm still trying to figure out. As you know, it's become clear that his clan communicate, generally undetected, through bird calls. On what I thought an unusual presence of a huge band of owls in the wood next to my home is actually Bigfoot conversing on their travels between the mountains beyond and the rivers below. And he watches me as well, having made a hidey hole in the rhododendron shrubbery over the lane, where he can see me at the dining table as I write. It even seems that this Bigfoot throws primitive woven stick toys into the garden for my dog. Having reported to you on these experiences, I decided it might be interesting to provide updates as there are new developments. So here's my first attempt at adding to the original report. I've considered long and hard why this creature has trusted me enough to make himself known. And I realised it may be because I'm the one person in this area who doesn't hunt or participate in annual shoots of birds and deer. There are other reasons too, far more complex, that I'll report on later, as they're a story in themselves. Although I've had no thoughts of this creature's existence until recently, his appearance has left me with a feeling of needing to protect him. My sighting was of a huge being, so enormous as to be terrifying. If I'd seen him standing in front of me, rather than from a respectable distance, I imagine I'd have run screaming. On the other hand, there was such a vulnerability in him standing there on the hill, nervously shifting back and forth, gauging what I do. If nothing else, we seem to have a healthy respect for one another, some kind of interest and curiosity. So I feel more and more responsible as his advocate to broadcast the bit that I've learned. And in this edition, I'll explain about the effects of what would seem to be Bigfoot vandalisation in the area. Very bad press for a creature that normally stays hidden and people are generally unaware of, or whose existence they deny. And I'll explain why I think this is happening. That our Bigfoot population may be at greater risk than anybody knows and without enough food. Right now, the hunting season approaches up here, and last year the Bigfoot seemed to vacate the area from early autumn until spring, The blackberries and raspberries, the fruit trees, the mushrooms are all gone. But this year, they still seem to be around, and there was a bit of a catastrophe related to their changed foraging patterns. All of the area residents got a letter saying that in the middle of the night, fencing had been torn up on a neighbouring estate. Someone had destroyed electric and barbed wire attached to metal posts that was sunk into cement and made no report of it. I was visualising that a car had gone out of control and perhaps the driver was a bit drunk or irresponsible at a late hour. And I learned that a great length of fence, about 30 metres or so, had been balled up into a huge knot and thrown in the road, metal fence posts and all. I drove down that way to see the damage, and it was rather breathtaking. All of it had been torn out of the ground and left in a knot, metal posts broken in half, cement fragments lying about. There were no tyre tracks. In fact, they were large boulders, and they would have prevented a car veering off into the brush. I imagine there'd be no obvious explanation to the landowner of what clearly seems a gigantic temper fit to those who are aware of Bigfoot's presence here. But I was apparently wrong. It's possible that I'm not the only one aware of these creatures, because for several nights afterwards, well after midnight, there were guns firing into the pitch-black darkness. I've lived here some years now, and this is something I've never heard about before. I began to worry what was happening, being more or less convinced that our resident hairy fellow might be involved in this mysterious vandalism and was being hunted. One morning, I decided to take my dog and walk the perimeter of the area to search for other signs of activity, to understand what was happening out there in the dark of night. Sadly, there's no way to warn the creature that this kind of infringement on human property was going to bring awful consequences for everybody. But maybe he'd see me out and about and realise not everyone was hostile or carrying a rifle. As I left the cottage, I put a line of highly polished, glittering stones along the retaining wall, where I sometimes find pebbles and wilted flowers left in little piles. Then I set out. Right away, I noticed that one of the hiding places in the rhododendron hedges below the cottage had been filled in with branches, as though to block access from the lane. As I stepped up into the wooded area further along, heading into the foliage, there was a sudden, horrible stench, a smell resembling a dead carcass mixed with fermented garbage. The odour was just overpowering. This seemed to be a classic warning not to continue into the woods, so I returned to the lane and I walked a good half mile in parallel with the tree line to the area where the fence had been destroyed. Along the way, the smell gradually subsided. As I stood looking at the place where the fence was now gone and the wire and the posts torn away, I realised that travelling as the crow flies some distance through the wood, the demolished fencing was in direct line with the observation hidey-hole that the Bigfoot had carved into the rhododendron hedge next to my cottage. And immediately below the ruined fence lay the main road, and a lay-by where a long row of industrial-sized rubbish bins had been left out, most often full of residential waste. Also very interesting, this incident had occurred in exactly the same place as a large tree limb had been launched through the air to stop my car in an apparent ambush this spring. It seemed clear from what I knew that the alpha male Bigfoot was laying claim to dangerous virgin territory this year. But why? The dog and I walked on, leaving the farm lane for the main road, and on approach towards the huge rubbish bins where I could see that one had been flung open and the contents ransacked. There was kitchen waste all over the ground, melon rind, juice containers, chicken bones and ready meal cartons. I decided to come back later with bin bags and clean it up. Meanwhile, we continued down the path to a neighbouring shooting estate, about a mile away, and then turned to come back along the same route. The rubbish was still strewn along the ground, and when we passed by this time, the bin lid had been closed with big muddy smears across the lid. Taking in the entire situation, I came to the conclusion that our alpha male was grasping for subsistence. Whatever he could glean from the river half a mile below, combined with a reliable source of bin rubbish, he could carry his takings uphill through the woods, minus that obstructive fence. He'd exit through the hidey hole at my cottage, and then from there into the high fields via a deep drainage ditch, and beyond stretched the vast forest. In some ways, a Bigfoot paradise. But it had also become clear the chances he was taking all of a sudden, and I wondered what was forcing this change in habit. What drove his obvious desperation? I mean, between the time I'd passed by the strewn about garbage the first time, looped around and returned, he'd been back to close the bin lid, in broad daylight, one would presume, after being shot at the night before. The panicked nature of his grab for a new kingdom was falling into place as we began the uphill climb on the farm lane to the cottage, when I was suddenly struck by the most awful feeling of exhaustion and nausea. My heart pounded and I felt faint. My vision seemed dim and I was afraid I'd never make it home. The dog looked confused, and when I stopped to sit down on one of the large boulders just above the ruined fence, he began to whine and pace, and he's very apt to pick on mood and emotions. I pulled out the mobile phone I keep in my pocket whenever I go out walking, and thought about calling for help. No sooner had I started to scroll through the address book when the feeling began to clear, and then suddenly, gone. I pulled myself up with my walking stick, and we continued slowly, finally arriving at the door. That evening, as I sat at the table, working, I heard pebbles on the windows and owl calls, something I hadn't heard in a long while. I stepped outside and listened. Everything was dead quiet. "Are you here to apologise?" I asked. "Didn't you see it was me? You know I won't hurt you, and I don't have any guns. You know you're welcome. We're friends, aren't we?" The air was completely still. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. It's been several weeks now, with no sign of him at all. The stones I put out as an offering were never taken, and I brought them back to the cottage before their purpose raises any questions with walkers coming down the lane. I wonder if it's a change of seasons, and if the pebbles on the windows were a goodbye for now, or an apology for having turned his energy against me, if it was a sad mistake. In any case, there's no sign of him at the moment. It was frightening that he didn't heed the guns, and he doesn't seem to understand the air that he's raised in destroying property here. But I'll be looking forward to any indication he's still out there, and meanwhile trying to think of ways to help. Bin rubbish, after all, is not his natural food. I think he knows what's going through my mind and what I'm trying to say, in which case he realises that I cleaned up his mess at the bins to try and keep him out of further trouble. Surely he realises I'm on his side. Anyway, I'll keep you posted on future developments. Signing off for now, Isabella.
Now, as many of you will be thinking, is this wonderful journal true? Well, we were very lucky in the fact that Charmaine Fraser, the leading Scottish Bigfoot researcher out there, visited the site in summer of 2017, so only last year, and she reported back favourably. The rhododendron brush is there, the rolled up fence was there. She said it was very large and concrete with chainmail, and it had been rolled up into a ball and pushed out of the way. She also reported an area quite close to the cottage where, when the deer cull happened, that the pluck and the carcasses were left there, so a veritable smorgasbord for any passing creature, no doubt. And I myself was very lucky in that this year, in early spring, I managed to visit with a number of researchers, and it was amazing to be up there and to see the land itself. Just over the hill is an amazing loch and miles and miles and miles of forest. And we saw pheasants and hare and so many kind of deer and just food sources everywhere. And you've got the salmon in the rivers and all of the other fish that obviously that you get there, and lots of protein sources. So it's beautiful. And if you could pick it up and move it, you'd probably think somewhere like Washington State in America. That's the kind of climate and environment we're talking about. So quite harsh winters, and short summers, but beautiful ones nonetheless. So as we left off, there seemed to be some interaction between the clan, as we shall call him, and the landowner himself. And I got another update from Isabella. And this was in October of 2017. So here's that entry for you, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, Deb. Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland. I thought I'd try to provide another update as winter closes in. The local shoot has been in the fields every day since last week, except in the pouring rain when they had to stay by the fire. So it's not a time for Bigfoot, or me for that matter, to be out and about. The biggest news from this site is that the landowner in our area, who had his fences torn down if you recall, has apparently decided it was a fluke or random vandalisation and is replacing them all. I can only predict that next March they'll be gone again, when the clan demand their territory and the right to roam once more. I suppose we'll see who wins out, but I know who I'm betting on anyway. Meanwhile, I thought I'd report an encounter with a fleeting herd of red deer that happened last spring and might interest your listeners. First, it's important to say that in this area we seldom come across stags. They seem to inhabit the loftiest areas. The hinds are regular visitors in the lower hills though, and we see them and their young all the time. A few here and there, and mostly at night. In general, sighting deer is a fairly leisurely event. They may be prancing down the road or grabbing at low-hanging foliage when the car's high beams glance off their wide eyes, reflecting back an intense golden light. Locals always give the deer plenty of time to find an escape through the hedges or over a wall. A fairly routine and lovely part of countryside life that we all treasure. So until recently, I've never witnessed an entire herd charging as one body in a panicked getaway. Returning in the car from a weekly grocery shop, cruising along the back roads, I slammed on the brakes to make way for the Highland equivalent of an out-of-control big game safari. There must have been about 40 wild-eyed, foaming, panicked red deer, pelting in a hell-bent pack across the road, several stags among them. Dropping from a high field onto the macadam at the frantic pace they hit hard, slid, recovered, then leapt one by one over a 4-foot stone wall above a steep embankment. In a near free fall they careered onto a narrow river-slide slip of land. There they piled up into a milling throng, just short of the water's edge, out of territory and completely hysterical. The rapids in that spot were running high that day, and there was no chance of swimming across. A few at a time they turned and faced back up the hill, alert, nostrils flared. Every one of these animals was healthy, mature, and a perfect specimen, except for the terror in their eyes. It was a thrilling sight to see at close range. Not sure what else might happen, I pulled up onto the verge and watched, trying to imagine a pursuer who could terrify a herd of this size, who was large enough to bring them all out at once from their usual retreats, far above the line of mist that sat along the hills. But this wasn't hunting season, and Scotland has no real predators, which is what allows the throngs to grow to such a size. So who or what could be in pursuit? In fact, every year the local landowners are given a list of how many deer they must cull because without some method of control, they'd soon consume every available source of food and starve. Our local laird shoots at least 3 dozen a year, selling them off to a gourmet larder, but not in May. So no hunters, no predators. What was afoot? I rolled down the windows and listened. The throng were breathing hard, frozen in time, stock still. By now it occurred to me who we awaited, who had the size, the need and the athleticism to push a great herd throng of wild creatures to this point at such a speed in a terror for their lives. But Bigfoot held back. 5 minutes went by and then another 5. Still wary, the deer began to cast about for an escape route. The largest stag took the lead and they headed out along an increasingly narrow spit of grass. Some distance along, they found a shallow bit of river and waded across to a huge area of open land, the town golf course. Bigfoot had lost his catch, or maybe he had one in his grass somewhere out of view. In any case, there were, no doubt, some very shocked golfers that day. At that, I had to smile as I started up the car and drove off. The other story in this edition of my journals is taken from an ancient legend, but about a place that still exists. The first time I heard this story, I interpreted its meaning like everyone else, as magical or inexplicable. But after sighting a Bigfoot in Scotland last year, and realising how long they've been in this part of the world, I view this tale now in an entirely different and practical light. We used to have friends living in the Scottish hamlet of Weem, and we went hiking in that area. The place has a mystical reputation. The carvings of the Old Man of the Woods and the Sleeping Dragon are there as well, as ancient stones with druidic carvings and cut marks. Camp crackers love Weem, well-kept trails and deep woods, and at one time there was a large cave at the forest edge known as the Weem Rock. It was said by the villagers in the nearby town of Aberfelder that wee folk and trolls inhabited the cave. Animals that wandered up that way were never seen again, and children were forbidden to go there. Of course, once you've forbidden children, you know a few are going to go and try it. And so they did, and disappeared, which isn't the end, but only the beginning of a mystifying story. The children were found on a regular basis near Loch Rannoch, on the other side of Mount Chehallen. Chehallen, called the Fairy Mountain by early Scots, because its surface of shattered quartz glowed in the dark, and was considered magical and haunted. It's peppered with caves and caverns. Tradesmen travelling between Rannoch and Aberfeldy would restore these missing children to their families. No one could explain how they turned up so far away and in such a short time. The children themselves remembered nothing, or so they all said. Early on, the conclusion was that the fairies carried them out there, or the little people lured the children away. Later, profuse tunnels were found leading from the back of the cave at Weem Rocks to parts unknown. No one cared to follow them to the end, but it was speculated they might extend for miles. Some people began to discount the fairy and troll theories. Even so, barring the idea of magic, there was no logical way the children could have travelled so far and fast on foot, nor any explanation why they didn't get lost and starve in the miles of catacombs. Eventually the cave at Weem Rock collapsed, some say with a significant amount of help from the townspeople, and from there it all devolved into local mythology and hearsay around the fire. When I heard these tales years ago, I imagined what everybody else does at first. Each region has its fairy stories in Scotland. This was just another one of those. But having seen Bigfoot now, and knowing that others have as well in far-flung parts of this country, I've reconsidered this supposed legend and realised that a Bigfoot clan may have carried children that distance in no time at all. Their range is magnificent, and their speed can overwhelm creatures as fleet of foot as a herd of red deer in full-blown panic. I imagine a speculation about an elaborate system of caves and tunnels may well be true, but with classic stoicism, the Scots have never understood, or at least never discussed, who inhabited them and why the children were supposed to stay away. I'm afraid that attitude continues to this day. Well, that's for me now, Deb. I'll be signing off. Until the next time, Isabella.
Now, it wasn't too long, and I got another email from Isabella, and this is what she had to say.
Hi, Deb. Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland. I never expected to be writing another entry in the journal so soon, but last night I had visitors here at the cottage. I felt sure the furry fellas had gone on to other hunting grounds as the traditional autumn bird shoots took over the countryside and the fruits and the berries disappeared from the farm lane, but apparently not. I normally have a feeling when the Bigfoot are close by, but this time it was my dog who noticed first. Usually I let him out one last time just before bed, around 10 p.m, and it's a very quick routine. He runs out to the farm lane for 30 seconds and straight back in again. But these past few nights he hasn't wanted to leave the house. He stands and listens and steps onto the porch and sniffs and then turns around whining. He's a big boy too. He's a retriever, weighing in around 45 kilo and generally scared of nothing. But the only way to get him out there over the past week is to switch on all the outdoor lights and go with him. I've had a good look round each time he went out onto alert, but I haven't seen anything, even with the lights on. All the while he's taking care of business, he's got his eyes trained on the far side of the drive, where I park my car. From this behaviour, I assume that one or more Bigfoot are hidden over there behind the hedgerow. No lights extend that far, so they'd be entirely cloaked in darkness. Just beyond the hedgerow is a 6-foot deep ditch along the adjoining field, extending maybe 100 yards. It's the drainage for winter rain off their low pastures and eventually lets out to a culvert on the farm lane. In midwinter it's nearly overflowing, but just now it's completely dry. From the far end of the drainage ditch, it's a straight shot to high pasture and the hillside where the alpha male first appeared, watching me and my dog play in the back garden. So on my way home last night from the dinner party that ran later than usual, I was aware of the clan's possible presence when I pulled in at midnight. I left the car lights on a few minutes to see if anybody popped up and showed themselves, but there was no sign of anything unusual. I shut the car down, got out, and headed for the porch. It was a wild autumn night. The wind was fierce and piles of dry leaves swirled around me. A bright half moon lit the sky and clouds went shooting across, alternatively covering and then revealing the golden moonlight like a flickering lantern. My long Malvern waterproof flowing behind me, cape flapping up and down around my shoulders, I made my way to the cottage, a perfectly spooky Halloween scene. At the door I realised I had the wrong key in hand and had to go searching along the key ring. Then, for some reason, it simply wouldn't slide into the lock. Growing impatient, I let out a few kind words for the benefit of the house, and just as the key slotted in and the door opened, I felt something hit the cape of my coat and fall to the ground. Stepping inside, I turned and looked out over the lawn, expecting to see at least one set of glowing eyes, but there was nothing. I decided to search in the morning for whatever had been thrown. I was tired, and whatever the object was had to be small. That much I could tell from the faint tap it made on my back. I'm well used to the clan tossing gravel and pebbles at the windows when I work late at night. It's unmistakable, teasing Bigfoot behaviour, but I've never noticed anything outstanding on the ground afterwards. In fact, there was a good possibility that what hit my coat had fallen in the gravel, and I'd never know exactly what they'd lobbed at me. Nevertheless, in the morning, I was outside when the sun came up, teacup in hand, searching for any objects the furry people may have thrown, all the while expecting it would be indistinguishable from the gravel path. In fact, I didn't have to search at all. There it was, glistening and glowing, an exquisite shimmering piece of quartz in the shape of a cabochon gemstone. It stood out like a beacon. I felt bad on seeing it. I wished I'd persisted with the torch or lantern the night before and picked it up. Of course, the winds had been awful, and I wasn't sure what I was looking for on such a blustery night. All the same, it would have been nice if whoever threw this stunning gift had seen me collect it. I brought the stone inside and set it on the table while finishing breakfast, picking it up and turning it over to catch the light. Actually, it looked like a shining stone from Chehalem. That's where the mountain got its name in Scots Gaelic. The Fairy Mountain, distinguished by all the glittering shattered quartz tumbling from its craggy peak. And then it occurred to me, Chehalem had been the subject of my last journal entry that you just put out the other night, Deborah. A chill ran up my spine. I suppose the world is full of synchronicities and wild coincidences, but this is truly strange. I mean, if the clan had any clue what's on my mind, the idea they'd know in such detail is still completely incomprehensible. The only similar sort of psychic experience I have is that my dog knows when I'm sad. I need to say nothing to him. He runs from anywhere he may be at that moment my spirits drop, and huge as he is, attempts to jump into my lap. Meanwhile, he tries to get his front legs around my neck to hug me, particularly since I don't follow him on the furniture, much less in my lap. Oh, I don't allow him. I'm very sorry. I don't allow him onto the furniture, very much less my lap. This is my very original and instinctive on his part. I have to particularly peel him away, telling him I'll be okay and not to worry. Then he makes do with the next best thing, propping his chin on my knee and watching my face intently. Could there possibly be a similar subconscious rapport with a Bigfoot? If so, then all things considered, I suppose this lovely pebble could be the Alpha's way of saying he feels a connection that I do. In any case, I imagine him out there, waiting for his chance, little pebble in hand, undeterred by hunters, the landowner's new electric fences, the late hour and howling wind. He still managed to deliver such a meaningful gift with his gentle toss in my direction. I feel very humble and really touched by that gesture. I wish I had a way to tell him so, but then again, he may already know. As a special feature of this journal entry, I've attached a few photos of the stone. Its glow is so brilliant in the lamplight, I've had a hard time getting a picture that isn't distorted, but I did the best I could. Once again, Deb, that's me for now. Signing off until next time. Isabella.
Now, as I explained earlier in this edition, I was lucky enough to go and visit Isabella at the cottage, and she gave me the little stone, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's incredibly smooth, and it almost looks, in certain lights, as if it gives a golden glow, and that's quite strange for quartz. As most of you know, quartz can be many colours, but this golden tiger's eye colour is something more like a tangerine quartz, I would say. But even that's not right. And it's incredibly tactile. You can hold it in your hand. And Isabella allowed me to bring it home with me. And it sits in my front room on a carving of the Green Man that is incredibly special to me. So almost shrine-like, some people would say. But I just thought you'd find it of interest. And I would like to point out, you will hear Isabella speak about cherry whips and cherry wood. And what's of interest is that when I was there on my visit, and we were discussing this because these get left for her on the doorstep and for the dog. There are no cherry trees. There are none. I didn't see any, and there wasn't any for miles around, and we made a point of looking for them. And it's just a beautiful area, as I said before. It's somewhere, if you wanted to go and live wild, this was probably the place where you'd want to go. So it wasn't too long from I heard from Isabella again, and it was in the second week of December. And here's what she had to say. Hi Deb, just a short note to say that this morning I had to go out, and I had headed to the village to mail Christmas packages in time for the Christmas post. When I returned, to my surprise, there were a couple of cherry whip-ends, cherry branches laid against the front door. They were very delicate fronds with a few dried leaves still attached to them. I had done a clear-up on the weekend to take up the last of the autumn rubble and leaves, so I knew it was all neat and tidy out there, meaning these whip ends stood out plainly as having been placed on the doorsill. In fact, there are no cherry trees about, and these have been imported. I'm unsure where they came from. Inside the cottage, my dog was going berserk. Although there's a heavy drape covering the front door, he was aware of the visit clearly and wanted me to know about it. He was excitable and running in circles and making a racket. It took him a while to settle down. So I think our forest friend is still in the vicinity and hasn't forgotten me. I'm amazed at the brashness of him though, turning up in broad daylight. The whip ends were not there when I left the house, so it would have to be while I'd been out in the village they were left. If you remember, I left some shiny stones out for him as a thank you for my stone gift. And when I checked the wall where I'd put the shiny stones in a circle, things were different there also. The stones were all moved onto the ground and none of them had been taken. It seems they had apparently been moved and left there on the floor. I wonder if they're too small and slippery as they're now covered in frost and impossible to pick up. Large hands, long nails, slippery stones. I'm thinking of something more manageable that I can put there for them. Maybe bunches of herbs. I still have sage surviving in the garden. Anyway, I was thinking of you when I saw those whips and I wanted you to know. Isabella. I think wild herbs will be a wonderful gift and one he may be very grateful to receive. As many of you will know that are interested in the Bigfoot phenomena worldwide, there are lots of gifting opportunities that happen between people and the forest folk, as we shall call them. Some people leave stones and marbles and intricate patterns with sticks. Other people find them on their property. And if you're lucky enough to be one of those people, you'll understand what we mean. A kind of trading, a kind of gifting, but not the actual gift that matters. More a way of saying, I'm aware of you, I'm here, and, thank you for the things that you do for me. And hopefully some of you who are now getting interested in the subject will also have some of these interactions yourself. But as we move on to another part of the journal, and we've had September and we're now on the later month of January. So January 2018, we're into this year now. And this is what Isabella had to say. Hello Deb, Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland. It's been a while since I've written, and once winter closes in up here, a lot of wildlife hibernates, and the hunters are out most weekends after pheasant and grouse and duck. We have a few gun enthusiasts that love to fill their baskets with doves. In other words, the fields and forests are anything but quiet, and nearly everybody out there is carrying a weapon or accompanied by bird dogs sniffing the air. I'd imagine it's time for our furry friends to hide out in the mountains above the gaming estates. They'd be quite visible for long distances amongst the bare trees, and once the snow starts, leave tracks everywhere they went. I believe that's why, for the most part, the clan that habituates this area in the warmer weather hasn't made itself known for a while. I didn't hear pebbles hitting the windows when I sat at the table writing after dinner, nor the heavy thumping sound of running feet besides the cottage when all the lights were out at night, or an occasional slap of somebody hitting the side of the house. Walking along the farm lane, there was no sense of anyone accompanying me, camouflaged by hedgerows and woodland along the route my dog and I normally take. For a few months I thought the clan entirely gone, and then there were several brief moments when they signalled their presence, both times late at night. The first was at the rising of the full moon, the supermoon, in December, the 3rd I believe it was. The moon was particularly close to the earth that night and rose as a gigantic orb over the fields and forest, shedding an extraordinary light. A light so bright that when it streamed through the window into the cottage, it woke me from a sound sleep. My dog was suddenly alert, and I could see him standing at the foot of the bed, poised, ears up and listening. I got up and went to the window to have a look, and the world was bathed in glistening silver, almost as though covered in snow, but glowing. The trees cast enormous shadows over the lane and fields. I felt that what had woken me was not only the light, but the incredible energy of the moon so close by, smiling down on us with such radiance. After a few minutes, I raised the window to let in some fresh air and got back under the covers. The dog had followed me to have a look outside, but he didn't return to his spot on the rug. He was still waiting, and he got his reward. A loud call, whoop, whoop, echoed over the hills, and then seemed to travel quickly along the field below the cottage, through the nearby forest and down towards the river. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The calls got louder and more insistent. It was a joyous sound of someone running through the moonlit night, bounding and bouncing and celebrating the amazing bright light, as bright as day and twice as lovely. The clan were on a supermoon hunt, probably to the river rapids for salmon, with a high beam shining overhead to illuminate their fishing expedition. I'd heard nothing from them since the Alpha left several delicate fronds of cherry branch on the doorsill in the autumn. Now they seemed to be telegraphing their delight as they passed by at a run. I felt they wanted me to know it was a party, an easy and delicious meal, a furry family picnic down along the riverbanks. I wondered who else might hear them and what they made of it. To me, it was like friends leaving an exuberant phone message to say, "We're on holiday, having the time of our lives, just wanted you to know." Once they were out of earshot, the dog resumed its place on the rug, the festivities had moved on, and there was no more news of the clan for a while. The next appearance was the night, once more, and equally surprising, on December the 31st, New Year's Eve. Across the fields, a half mile or so, one of the gaming estates had a New Year's do that went into the wee hours. After the midnight, music, horn and shouting, they set off a substantial show of fireworks. I'd been reading a book next to the fire in the lounge and saw the sprays of red and white and blue, orange and green rise over the pine trees outside, crackling and sizzling. Rockets shot into the sky, showering silver, each of them followed by a long deep boom, boom, boom. And again the dog and I were on our feet. He stood watching, his tail wagging, as I moved onto the window seat, enjoying the arrival of 2018. Boom, boom. The show went on for a good 20 minutes. I'd never seen a light round here before, and especially not from a prime spot in my own living room. I stepped out the front door in my robe and slippers as the fireworks finale blessed our valley with a blossoming banquet of light. High into the black sky and then exploding in all directions, fading the world with colour. "Happy New Year," I shouted to my dog, but he appeared to have lost interest in the whole noisy project. He was watching in a different direction. As the mountainside and fields fell silent again, he was watching the woods. It was 2018, for better or worse. I took in a deep breath of the clear air, feeling thankful for our life is such a beautiful place. Highland, Scotland is a wonderful place to live, and as I did, a
chorus of half a dozen owls broke out in the forest next to the cottage. The loud hooting sounded appreciative, curious, surprised. I've long ago learned there was no such thing as an owl chorus. 6 owls do not hang about and hoot all at once. It was the clan commenting on this sudden and strange human exclamation point, the wild lights and reverberating din. Did they know it was New Year, I wondered? What did they think of this shimmering sky, the explosions and racket? I leaned inside the cottage door and turned on the Christmas lights I'd wrapped around a tree in the front garden, and I called out once again, "Happy New Year, my friends." The owls went silent, and that's the last I've heard from the clan. A few days later it began to snow, and I'd imagine it's too hard to disguise their travels, to camouflage their footprints. I've been snowed in for a week now, and hope they're well and finding food. I'd imagine they've gone high up into the mountains to hunt and shelter in the caves. But I know they'll be back, eventually, and probably when I least expect it.
I'm so grateful to Isabella for sharing those journal accounts with us. And as I said before, that's just half of the journal. And next week I'll bring you the remaining chapters. One that's just last week, and that's why I wanted to do it like this. And I'm also going to bring you some of the other accounts in the area. And there's more than just one. The earliest one that I found was obviously the big grey man. I think lots of people know that account, and this was in the Craigie Barnes area, and this was in the 17th century. And it was a man, it's written in a document, and it was the Clan Murray, and they were reported to having captured a wild man on the Craigie Barnes rocks and chained the wild man, and he still appears in their heraldic shield to this day, and that's dated 1791. But would it surprise you to know that way back in the 6th century, when we were invaded by the Gauls, there was a mention of satyrs or man-monkeys who lived in the area, and it was called Burnham back then, and made it intolerable for people to live, namely the Gauls. And the only thing that scared them was fire, and they were large, hairy ape men, monkey men, satyrs, as I say, covered in hair. They would steal fish from the nets and annoy local women folk and run off with them. Well, there are also accounts that are not that old, 17th century. But in Loch Tay, in 2014, we have the Loch Tay Howls, and that's quite a long account, and that's what I said, I'd like to bring that to you next week, because we also have a very terrifying fairy encounter from the mountain that was mentioned, Chehalan, which is the fairy mountain, and that's just between Loch Rannoch, which was also mentioned, and above Loch Rannoch there's another loch called Loch Erich, and that many motorists will know that as the Drumocta Pass. And in 2014, 2 hairy wild men were reportedly seen there, and the gentleman was really happy to give me the account, and I'll bring that to you next week. And not too far away, just a little walk away, we have the tall grey man of Ben MacDoo, and this is the Corabuffer, and this was in 2005, and this was posted in a wild camping magazine, and it's about the big grey man, and it's a lot of people up there talk about this very large figure that either can be seen or heard up there. We're not too far from Nairn here, you see, and the Claver Cairn, sorry about that, the Claver Cairn sightings, where there are lots and lots of reports of a big ginger rar, which is a auburn-coloured hairy thing, in the Claver Cairn. So all across this area, there are about 10 other accounts. So I'll bring them to you next week, and we'll start in the centre at Tay Forest. We'll finish the journal off, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And you've been listening to Deborah Hatswell on the Crypto Realm, and we're on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I would like to think that you'd all tune in next Thursday at 10 p.m. GMT till 11 p.m. And thank you to Mark and Irene, my wonderful producers, for doing all the work post for me. And I'll see you all next week. So good night, everybody.